Chapter 11, The Congress.
Fulfilling the Connecticut Compromise. Led by Virginia, the large states wanted a bicameral legislature based on population. Led by New Jersey, the small states wanted a unicameral Congress with equal representation for each state. The framers resolved this dispute by agreeing to a compromise calling for a bicameral Congress with representation in the House of Representatives based on population and a Senate in which the states would have equal representation. Bicameral Congress. Each house was intended to serve different constituencies. The house was to be elected by the people and would therefore represent the views of the people. The members of the Senate were selected by the state legislature and would be at least one step removed from the people. The framers of the U.S. Constitution created a bicameral Congress consisting of a House of Representatives and a Senate. The two houses of Congress have different characteristics. There are several reasons why the framers created a bicameral legislature. For the first, they're drawn on historical experiences. The framers were intimately familiar with the British system of government, which has a bicameral system with a House of Lords and a House of Commons. Most of the colonial legislatures and state legislatures were bicameral. Basic House and Senate differences. Size and rules. The size, length of term, and constituencies of the House and the Senate are different, and in turn, these generate more differences. We will get more into the differences as we go through this PowerPoint. Debate and filibustering. The Senate has a tradition of unlimited debate. The use of such debate is to block a bill is known as filibuster. Cloture is a way to stop a filibuster, requiring the approval of 60 senators. If a vote for cloture is approved, debate is limited to a maximum of 1 hour. And prestige. The House also differs in prestige. Senators, because of their longer term and fewer numbers, can achieve a level of personal recognition that is almost impossible to achieve unless one is the leader of the House of Representatives. Here is a chart of the basic differences between the House and the Senate. The House is much larger with 435 members compared to 100. Elections are held more frequently in the House, every 2 years compared to every 6 years. And members must be at least 25 years old, American citizens for 7 years, and a resident of the state from which he or she resides, and must live within that district he or she would like to represent in the House. In the Senate, they must be at least 30 years old, American citizens for 9 years, and a resident from within the state. In 1929, the number in the House was set at 435, and it guaranteed at least one seat to each state. They served 2-year terms, and all 435 are up for re-election every 2 years. South Dakota has one representative, and it is Kristi Noem, a Republican. There are 100 members in the Senate, 2 per each state. South Dakota has John Thune, a Republican, Tim Johnson, a Democrat. Senators are elected at large by the entire state, and nearly 1/3 of the senators were once members of the House of Representatives. The Senate is a prime source for presidential candidates. Every 2 years, 1/3 of the members of the Senate are up for re-election.
In November of 2014, Mike Rounds replaced Tim Johnson. He is up for re-election again in 2020. You may recognize his face and his name as he is the former governor of South Dakota, serving from 2003 until 2011.
With 1/3 up for re-election at a time, this is called a staggered term. They serve a total of 6-year terms, and there are no term limits. Senators have more political power than people from the House of Representatives. Besides pay, there are many benefits of being in Congress. A travel allowance. The United States government pays for round trips for members of Congress to travel back to visit their constituents or just return home. They have medical coverage at a low price for life. They have money to hire their staff and equip their office, along with free parking and printing. Immunity for misdemeanor crimes while in D.C. Continuing on with the differences between the House and the Senate. Members of the House of Representatives have always been directly elected by the people. In 1913, the 17th Amendment changed the way senators were elected. Before 1913, state legislators chose the senators. After the passing of the 17th Amendment, the senators are now chosen by the voters in each state. Here are 3 things that the House of Representatives can do that the Senate can't. The first one, initiate revenue bills. If it deals with money, it must start with the House. They can bring charges of impeachment against the President, Vice President, and civil officers of the United States. And lastly, they choose the President when the Electoral College is deadlocked. Here is a chart of the special powers of the Senate. The first one, they ratify treaties negotiated by the President, and they possess the sole power to try or judge impeachment cases. They also confirm judicial appointments, including U.S. attorneys, federal judges, and U.S. Supreme Court justices. They also confirm executive appointments, including cabinet heads, the director of the FBI, and the U.S. Attorney General. Gerrymandering is a legislative process by which the majority party in each state legislature redraws congressional districts to ensure the maximum number of seats for its candidates. It has the following consequences: protects incumbents and discourages challengers, strengthens the majority party while weakening the opposition party, and it increases or decreases minority representation. In comparison to the general population, the members of Congress are significantly different both demographically and economically. The members of Congress are older, wealthier, and better educated than the general public. There are relatively few women and members of minority groups in Congress, although this situation is improving. Finally, there is just a disproportionate number of lawyers in both houses of Congress. From 1789 to 1855, the members of Congress received only a per diem, a daily payment of $6 while in session. Today, that wage is $174,000. Depending on rank, some individuals receive more. An example would be the Speaker of the House receives $223,500, and majority and minority leaders in the House receive about $193,000. A cost of living adjustment increases take over annually unless Congress votes to not accept it. The census is taken every 10 years to determine how many seats each state has in the House of Representatives. Reapportionment. The dividing up of seats in the House of Representatives to each state after each census. Redistricting, the redrawing of the boundaries of the congressional districts within each state. The Supreme Court has put limits on congressional redistricting. Districts must be equally populated, or as close as possible. Districts must be compact. Lines must be contiguous or connected. There can not be any islands. Redistricting cannot dilute minority voting strength. District lines cannot be drawn based solely on race. However, race can be one of the variety of factors that are considered when redrawing district lines. In the Westbury versus Sanders case, Supreme Court case in 1964, set forth the principle of one person, one vote, and drawing congressional districts. The case triggered widespread redistricting that gave cities and suburbs greater representation in Congress. Westbury versus Sanders, 1964. Here is the image of the original gerrymandering. It was done by the governor of Massachusetts. Congressional elections. Congressional elections are conducted by the individual states in accordance with the rules established by the Constitution and the national statutes. The Constitution states that representatives are to be elected every second year, and the number of seats awarded to each state is determined every 10 years by the results of a census. Senators are elected every 6 years. Candidates for congressional seats can be self-selected or recruited by the local political party. Usually the party attempts to recruit or select a candidate who possesses many of the social characteristics of the population in the district. It is also likely that a person will be picked who has been successful in elections at the local or state level. The capacity for fundraising is now an important consideration both for the political parties and for the potential candidates themselves. In every state, the nomination for Congress are determined by the voters in a direct primary election. In this election, candidates vie for the nomination among voters who are party identifiers. If a candidate wins the nomination, he or she will run under the party label in the general election in November of even-numbered years. Presidential effects. Congressional elections are influenced by many factors. One important factor is the presidential elections. If a strong presidential candidate is on the ticket, that candidate may have coattails that benefit candidates. However, the presidential coattail effect in recent years has been modest or non-existent. And last, the power of incumbency. We talked about this prior to this chapter in previous units, and we will reflect on it or study it again. Incumbents have a huge advantage in congressional elections. In recent decades, over 90% of the members of the House were re-elected, and only a slightly smaller proportion of senators were re-elected. Clearly, the incumbent has a significant advantage. One of the major reasons for this is free publicity the member of Congress receives. As an elected official, the media constantly reports on events that involve the members of Congress. The public usually knows much more about members of Congress than they do about the challenger. Because incumbents are much more visible, they are able to create more money for their campaign. They're also better known to the constituents than the challenger. Incumbents have the ability to include pork in their bills to benefit their people back home or their constituents. Franking privilege. They have the right to mail out letters at the expense of the government. And gerrymandering. People in Congress have the rights to draw district lines, which often can benefit the incumbents. The committee structure. The power of committees. The key to understanding how Congress operates is to understand congressional committees. These little legislatures determine whether a bill will reach the floor and be called for a vote. The obstacles to a bill reaching the floor are numerous, and the committee structure is the maze through which the bill must pass to become legislation. Standing committees. These are the most important committees in Congress because all bills are referred to a standing committee in each chamber. Each standing committee covers an area of specialization and is subdivided into subcommittees. Select committees. These are created to accomplish a particular task. Unlike standing committees, select committees are not permanent. Once the task has been accomplished, the select committee may be abolished. Joint committees. These are established with members of each chamber serving on the committee. The tasks assigned to these committees are very diverse. House Rules Committee. This is a very powerful standing committee in the House of Representatives. Once the appropriate standing committee in the House has approved a bill, it is sent to the Rules Committee. This committee makes rules that all govern what will happen to the bill on the floor of the House. Who creates bills? Well, actually, anyone can write a bill, and most bills are not written by members of Congress. Most bills actually originate in the executive branch. Business, labor, agriculture, and other interest groups often draft bills. But only members of Congress can introduce bills. They do so by dropping a bill into the hopper, a box hanging on the edge of the clerk's desk. Approximately 5,000 bills are introduced each year, but only about 2.5% of these bills are made into law. The bicameral Congress and its complex committee system present a formidable series of legislative obstacles that defeat most bills. The legislative process is lengthy, deliberate, fragmented, and characterized by negotiations and compromise. How a bill becomes a law. For a bill to become a law, it must pass through both houses of Congress, and all money bills must start in the House. The procedure in the Senate is similar, but there is no special rule such as the House Rules Committee. Because there are 435 members in the House, they must be very formal in how they get things done. The House Rules Committee give the bill a rule, place it on the legislative calendar, and allow a specific time for debate and determining if any amendments would be allowed. In the Senate, procedures permit members to speak on the floor as long as they wish, and you hear of a filibuster from the opposing side. They filibuster in an attempt to block the legislation. If there are any differences between the House version of the bill and the Senate version of the bill will be sent to a conference committee. Members of each chamber, selected by the leaders, will attempt to reach a compromise on the bill.
Former leadership. The presiding officer in the House of Representatives is the Speaker of the House. The Speaker is always a member of the majority party and is the most powerful and influential member of the House. Majority Leader of the House, a legislative position held by an important party member in the House of Representatives. The Majority Leader is selected by the majority party in caucus or in a conference to foster cohesion among party members and to act as a spokesman for the majority party in the House. Minority Leader of the House, the party leader elected by the minority in the House. Whips. These are members of the Congress who aid the majority or the minority leaders of the House or in the Senate. The President Pro Tem, the temporary presiding officer of the Senate when the Vice President is absent. The Senate Majority Leader. This is the chief spokesman of the majority party in the Senate, who directs the legislative program and party strategy. The Senate Minority Leader, the party officer in the Senate who commands the minority party's opposition to the policies of the majority party and directs legislative programs and strategies of his or her own party.
Who creates bills? Well, actually, anyone can write a bill, and most bills are not written by members of Congress. Most bills actually originate in the executive branch. Business, labor, agriculture, and other interest groups often draft bills. But only members of Congress can introduce bills. They do so by dropping a bill into the hopper, a box hanging on the edge of the clerk's desk. Approximately 5,000 bills are introduced each year, but only about 2.5% of these bills are made into law. The bicameral Congress and its complex committee system present a formidable series of legislative obstacles that defeat most bills. The legislative process is lengthy, deliberate, fragmented, and characterized by negotiations and compromise. How a bill becomes a law. For a bill to become a law, it must pass through both houses of Congress, and all money bills must start in the House. The procedure in the Senate is similar, but there is no special rule such as the House Rules Committee. Because there are 435 members in the House, they must be very formal in how they get things done. The House Rules Committee give the bill a rule, place it on the legislative calendar, and allow a specific time for debate and determining if any amendments would be allowed. In the Senate, procedures permit members to speak on the floor as long as they wish, and you hear of a filibuster from the opposing side. They filibuster in an attempt to block the legislation. If there are any differences between the House version of the bill and the Senate version of the bill will be sent to a conference committee. Members of each chamber, selected by the leaders, will attempt to reach a compromise on the bill. If a bill lands on the president's desk, what can he do? The first thing, he could sign the bill into law. He could choose not to sign the bill, and after 10 days if Congress is still in session, it becomes a law. If it adjourns during the 10-day period, it becomes known as a pocket veto and doesn't pass. He may outright just sign a veto to the bill. And if he does veto the bill, Congress can override a veto with 2/3 majority vote in both the Senate and the House, which is a difficult process, but it has happened in the past. Party membership is a major determinant of how members vote, but is not the only factor at work. There are 4 different ways a congressional member makes a decision. A trustee, holders of the public trust who must decide issues based on merit alone. Delegates, which are agents of those who elect them. Partisans, vote on issues according to the party platform. And politicos, balance the role of the trustee, delegate, and partisan. The oversight function. Congress is responsible for reviewing actions of the executive branch, especially the implementation of policy or legislation. Inquiries are made to determine whether implementation reflects legislative intent, about the effectiveness of the federal bureaucracy, and whether the bureaucracy is fulfilling the needs of the public. The War Powers Resolution was a response to presidential actions during the Vietnam War. The resolution was designed to ensure that Congress had a greater voice in presidential decisions committing military forces to hostile situations overseas. The War Powers Resolution required the President to notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying troops. The President must bring troops home from hostilities within 60 to 90 days unless Congress extends the time. The necessary and proper clause. Implied powers emanate from the necessary and proper clause of Article 1, Section 8. This clause allows Congress to make all the laws that are deemed necessary to carry out the enumerated powers, or express powers. In McCulloch v. Maryland, the Supreme Court ruled that this clause allows Congress considerable discretion and authority to enact laws. The necessary and proper clause allows Congress to make all laws that are deemed to be necessary to carry out the express powers.